Welcome to the Power of Purity podcast, the show that empowers men to experience their sexual gift in a healthier way. Now here's your host, Tony Ingracia.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Power of Purity podcast. I'm so glad that you could be with me today, and I'm really excited about this episode of the podcast because I have a very, very special guest, Keelie Reason, with the website and the blog lovehopeadventure.com. So Keelie, thank you for being here with us today.
It's my pleasure to be here.
I've been looking forward to talking with you and kind of doing this interview. I learned of you, some months ago through the Delight Your Marriage podcast. You've been a guest on that podcast a couple times, and you have awesome things to say, and I just thought it'd be wonderful if I could get you to be a guest on the Power of Purity podcast. So thanks for being here.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me. I'm really excited.
Great. So before we start, or maybe a good way to start would, if I just was to ask you to share with us a little bit about yourself. Are you married? Do you have kids? What's your favorite hobby? Do you go to church? Just anything that you think would be appropriate to share, just so we kind of get a sense of who you are.
Okay. Well, my name is Keelie, obviously, and I am married to my high school sweetheart. Austin and I have been dating since we were 16. So we've been married for 13 years, in relationship for 18, and we were in ministry, like full-time ministry. He was an associate pastor for 10 years.
Wow.
And he left that, just kind of hit a point where he needed to take a step back. And God has during that period of time when God led us out of being full-time ministry, Love Hope Adventure really started to come about during that period of time because I needed extra income and I'm a freelance writer. And just through all of that, we created Love Hope Adventure. And we have 3 great boys. One is 6th grade this year, so we're getting into youth group, which is pretty crazy. And now my husband is preaching on the weekends at a church nearby. He's been there for over a year and a half, and he leads their worship and he preaches for them. But it's not like a typical pastoral role where he's on full time. So that leaves us to work on our blog, Love Hope Adventure, and then just other parts of the business that we do for people for websites.
Awesome. That sounds great. So you guys have 3 boys. That's kind of interesting because my wife and I have 3 boys.
Oh, wow.
Only I think that we might be ahead of you. My oldest son is 30 years old.
Oh, my goodness. He could be my brother.
Right. But my wife and I are celebrating, coincidentally, our 33rd wedding anniversary this week, the week that we're recording this episode. So I'm very excited about that and very proud just of what God's done in our hearts and lives and on our marriage. I'm not sure that you've heard my story yet, but
I haven't.
The fact that my wife and I are together after 33 years is literally a miracle of God. We went to hell and back in the context of our marriage, and in large part, at the epicenter of our crisis was the issue of sex. We were 2 very deeply broken people around the sexual area of our life, and when you take 2 messes and you put them together, you get a bigger mess. And that's what we were in the early years of our marriage, and it took us quite a while to get some things figured out, and we ended up in this pretty extensive process of Christian counseling. And but it was difficult, but it was redemptive, and God used it to really dig deeply into our hearts and lives and help us figure some things out and change some things. And now we're living the dream. We're in the happily ever after part for real. It's like we're on our honeymoon. So I just praise God that He has the power to change human hearts and lives, and He has the power to redeem deeply broken marriages.
That is such an amazing testimony.
Yeah, it's really cool. So could you share with us just a little bit more about this concept of love, hope, adventure. So you guys have had a heart for ministry, a background in ministry. You love God, you want to serve God. Of all the topics you could choose to write about and try to help people, you have this heart, this passion, this vision for this concept of love, hope, adventure, which essentially is a marriage theme. Your heart is to
Yes.
encourage and help marriages. Is that correct?
It absolutely is. And so I have always wanted to be a writer, ever since I was a kid, and I had no clue how that would ever happen. And so when blogging came about, my husband Austin, he kept saying, "You need to be a blogger. You need to write blogs." And I'm not a tech person at all. So I didn't know what a blog was. I didn't read blogs. It was just a really foreign concept to me. So when I started being a freelance writer, I totally fell into that. I had no clue where I was going to go with it or what it was. And through working for other people for a year, I told Austin, I said, it's just time. I need to start a blog. I'm doing all this for other people. I need to do it. But I was really starting to pray, what should I blog about? Because we're in the world of niche blogs where everybody is writing about one theme on the blog for the most part.
Right.
And the only blogs that I followed at the time was a financial blog and then a dating blog. They're called the Dating Divas, and I love them. Love Hope Adventures, not completely modeled after them, except for the bedroom games that we've created. But I just kept coming back to the marriage theme, and God was just showing me that's what we needed to talk about, because Austin and I have always had a heart for talking about sex to teenagers. So I've run like True Love Waits retreats and stuff when I was in college. And in youth ministry, we talked to teenagers a lot about sex. But when I was in MOPS group, which is a mothers of preschoolers, I started realizing that women who were married had a lot of questions about sex. And that kind of took me by surprise, because in my family with my parents, they were very open talking about sex. I mean, we didn't have the conversation, we had an ongoing conversation.
Awesome.
And my parents have always talked to me about sex when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, even after I've gotten married. And they instilled it in me and my brothers and all of our spouses that, sex is super important and you need to keep that at a forefront of your marriage. So God just brought that to me as being something I was highly passionate about. And over the course of the years, we've had a lot of friends go through marital troubles, and, obviously being in ministry, seeing couples go through trials. And Austin has done some weddings and done some counseling and stuff like that. So that's kind of where we started it, just with the idea that we wanted to talk about marriage and specifically about sex and marriage.
I think that's awesome, because I think there's such a gigantic need, and it sometimes this subject tends to be a little bit taboo in the context of the church, and there's not a lot of resources. So it's a wonderful resource that you offer that I'm sure is very encouraging and helpful to a lot of people. But I'm curious. You mentioned that somewhere along the line it was occurring to you, or you were seeing or realizing that a lot of married women had questions, maybe issues around the topic of sex, so you kind of had a heart to speak into that. What would you say are some of these common questions and issues that women in marriage sometimes have, or difficulties or challenges that women sometimes struggle with the concept of sex in their marriages?
Well, so where it first started was when I was in the group, the Mothers of Preschooler group. This is a national organization, MOPS. I was asked to come talk about marriage. It was Valentine's a couple years ago. And so when I think marriage, I think sex, and it's Valentine's. So what, right? So I get in there and I talk about marriage and sex. And from that conversation, that time where I led these ladies, I had a lot of women come up to me not just after that, but in years following, saying, "Oh, you're that sex talk lady. That was a really amazing talk."
Great. The sex talk
And
lady.
yeah, and I actually own the domain that iamthesextalklady.com, and I blog over there more openly about sex because I the goal behind Love Hub Adventure is to bring in women who would not go searching about sex and give them a very trusting place where they can read about it without putting it in their face, but then directing them to more open talk, discussion about it.
And what is that website again?
iamthesextalklady.com.
I am the
So I can,
sextalklady.com. I didn't know about this. I can't wait to check it out.
yeah, I reference it. Like, I will put articles over there that aren't as fitting on Love Hub Adventure, and then I link to them. And I put a lot of times in my newsletters and stuff, I'll link to that website because what women that I am targeting, they are women that love the Lord. They want to do right by their husbands. And they know, they keep being told, well, sex is good and sex is for your husband, and you need to please your husband and be willing to do this. And what I want women to know is that sex is for that couple. And I think women,
Absolutely.
they really have this idea, not all of them, but some women have this idea that this is just their duty as part of their relationship to their husband to have sex. And I think they really miss out when they view it like that.
Right. How sad. Absolutely. Almost like a chore, or what I call duty sex. It's something that I'm obligated to do. Like, I do the laundry in the house, I mop the kitchen floor, I do the dishes, I do the grocery shopping, and oh, yeah, I'm supposed to have sex with my husband because that's what a good wife does. And what you're saying is that you think that there's a lot of women that kind of end up in that place with that kind of
Exactly.
viewpoint and opinion and appetite of sex. So, what do you think that's all about? Why do so many women, and even Christian women, end up in this kind of diminished position and viewpoint of sexuality?
Well, I mean, honestly, some of it is rooted in just this teachings in the church. And I'm not saying my church or whatever, but I think that we as women are given this idea, like by the culture, that sex is something that men need and want and expect out of us. So, as a Christian wife, we think we understand that sex is something that's important or a need, and we want to provide that for our spouse. So, I think it's just like this melding of what the culture has done to sex for women and our understanding of the scriptures. I mean, maybe even some Christians teach that having sex is for men. I don't know that. I've never heard that, but it probably could be taught somewhere.
Right. So
I
what
don't know. It's just a matter of I don't know. The culture really does kind of teach women that their sexuality is something to be ashamed of.
right. And I think it's probably a well recognized reality that, in every marriage, every couple, there's a higher sexed partner and a lower sexed partner. And sometimes the woman can be the higher sex person, but
Oh,
more
absolutely.
more often than not, I suspect that it's the man that's higher sexed, and because of that, the woman typically has lower desire, or very frequently is the low desire person. So maybe she could kind of take it or leave it, but her husband has high desire, he's really into it. So she ends up in this kind of subservient place where it almost feels like she has to do it, even if she doesn't really want to do it, but she's supposed to do it if she's going to be a good wife. And therefore, she ends up in this place of duty sex.
Yeah, and I'll tell you that I am against duty sex, but I've heard a lot of women talk about duty sex. I want to do this for my husband. Now, I'm not against having sex with your spouse when you're not really in the mood, because women are very rarely in the mood when they have sex. I mean, it kind of takes getting into, the heat of the moment for women to get turned on.
Right.
That's just biologically what they're dealing with. So women, I think, will think they have a lower drive than what they actually have because they're not really in the mood.
That's really good.
When
Yeah, that's good.
when they start having sex, though, it's like, hey, this is actually really good. I want to keep doing this. So one thing that I noticed for myself with duty sex, because there was a period of time where I was kind of struggling with that myself. Austin and I, we had different expectations at night, and if we were going to bed really late, um, that is not when I want to have sex. I don't want to have sex
Right.
when I'm exhausted.
Sure.
So there were some times when I was having sex out of duty, and we used to have this discussion. Is this for you? Or I mean, is this for both of us, or is this just for me? Like, this used to be a standard discussion every time we go to have sex. Is this for both of us? Or, is this just for me? Or are you just doing this for me? Because he recognized there were times when I was doing it just for him.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with that. And I don't consider that duty sex. But what would happen is I would say ahead of time, I'm not really in the mood. This is just for you. But by the time we're halfway through it, I'm ready. Like, oh gosh, I wish I hadn't said that.
You're getting in the mood. Sure.
I'm getting in the mood now. And he's about done. And so that actually built a lot of resentment in me because, I was getting to a place where I was aroused, but I couldn't do anything with it because we had this discussion ahead of time. So one of the things that I finally decided was that I wasn't ever going to say it was just for him. And that was my own decision because of it was building resentment in me. And that's not his fault. That's mine.
Right.
So I had to address it.
That's really good, Keelie. So what advice would you have for these Christian women, or if there was a Christian woman listening to this episode and she can really identify with what you're describing right now? She's kind of in this place of, for lack of a better term, duty sex. She does it more for her husband than for herself. She has a diminished level of desire or interest. What advice do you offer, or how do we help her to grow, or what does she need to understand or deal with or come to terms with? How can we help her to be more present, more interested, more participating in her marriage?
Well, there are so many things that a woman has to address, and all of them are mental. I mean, for the most part, it's mental. So a woman has to decide, first of all, do I have any sexual baggage I have to work through? And she very well may. If she's
That's
been
so
abused
good.
in the
Yes.
past, she's got to deal with that abuse because she's not going to feel free to enjoy sex if she's dealt with sexual abuse in the past. She could have like some teachings that's kind of hanging her up. Well, good girls don't really like sex or something like that. She's got to get through those inhibitions of feeling shame for her physical desire and then admit that she does have physical desires and be willing to cultivate them. But it's all mental for women. So I tell women, you have to give yourself permission to enjoy sex, to acknowledge that you like it, and to fantasize about your spouse. Just giving yourself that permission, and it will really free them up.
That's so good, Keelie. I really like it. I happen to be a licensed professional counselor in the state of Missouri. I hold a master's degree in counseling, and I really like this concept of a tree producing fruit, and the idea of these four words. Fruit comes from roots. An apple tree makes apples, an orange tree makes oranges, but ultimately the fruit that's coming out on the tree is a byproduct of the roots themselves. And so often people have what I might call root issues in their life that they've never ever dealt with, and it might go all the way into their past, maybe their history, their sexual history, things that happened to them, things that they themselves have done, their shame. It might have to do with relational issues in the context of the marriage itself.
Mm.
It might have to do with issues that a woman has with herself, just her body image, her self esteem. But so often there's these issues that have been undealt with, unrecognized, or identified, and people have never dealt with that stuff, and it has a way of following you, kind of like a shadow, into the context of your marriage, and then
Mm.
even deeper into the context of the marriage bed. And it really hinders your ability to be free and to enjoy sex and to be present to your spouse and to enter into the sexual relationship that's so wonderful and beautiful the way God always intended it to be.
Absolutely. I didn't grow up with the mindset that sex was for men. Okay, my parents were very open with me. My parents talked to me a lot about sex, and I knew for a fact that they enjoyed sex with each other, both of them, and that it was for both of them, and that so I didn't have that hang up to get over, but I had other issues that I had to get over that were keeping me from admitting that I had sexual desires and that I wanted to act upon them. So one of the problems in my marriage was that I did not initiate. And because women take longer to get in the mood and warmed up, she can get in the mood a lot faster if she's willing to initiate. But initiating is very hard, especially if you got sexual baggage or shame tied to that. So it's a lot. You don't feel as shameful if your spouse comes to you and asks for sex because it's not on you, it's on them. You're just doing that thing to please your spouse.
Right, you're responding.
You're responding. You're not initiating. You're not admitting, hey, I need sex. I want to be with you. And some women really struggle to say that,
Right,
mainly because of the shame that they have attached with sex, whatever the shame or whatever the reason for the shame.
right. So I think that there's truth to this concept that sometimes the issues that we're struggling with, even sexually in the context of the marriage, really it's trying to expose something. It's like when a blinking light's going off on your dashboard in the car, it's telling you, warning, warning, something's not right here. So
Mm,
if there's this low desire, this inability to initiate, this inability to enjoy, it's like these are all signals that something isn't right. We need to give attention to something. We need to look at something, repair something, so that hopefully we can be in a healthier place with each other. Can
absolutely.
can I ask you, Keely, in your case, you talked about how it was hard for you to initiate.
Oh,
For
absolutely.
and how would you put words to that? What was it that was making it so hard for you personally?
I just had some things that I had to get over from just some things I needed to get over about sex. And I had to come to terms with the fact that I was not admitting that I had sexual desires. I was really suppressing them. And I'm not really a shy person, but when it came to initiating, I was very shy. It was just a mental thing that I had to get over. I don't know why. I mean, I do know why, but I just had some shame associated with taking physical pleasure. Like if it was given to me and I didn't initiate that, then I didn't feel bad about it. But if I had to initiate, that was an issue. So, because my husband's and my schedule was different as far as wanting to go to bed at night or whatever, my inability to initiate was causing a lot of problems. Um,
It's
and if
something
he would,
something maybe that was hurtful to him because
oh, absolutely
I
hurtful to him.
I mean I can tell you certainly, as a guy, as a husband, and I mean I can relate to this conversation from the early days of our marriage. I mean, imagine this, I thought of this metaphor one time with my boys. I have three boys, and I'm an outdoorsman. I love to hike and hunt and fish and all that stuff. And we actually have a lake behind our house, a small pond. So I asked my son to go fishing. This is a metaphorical story. So I say, "Hey Sam, you want to go fishing?" He says, "No, Dad, I don't want to go. No, thanks." So the next day I ask him again, "Hey Sam, you want to go fishing?" "No, no, Dad, I don't want to go. Thanks. I'm going to play my video game." And I have a heart to spend time with my son. I want to be a good dad. We should hang out. We should do something. So I keep asking him day after day, and he keeps saying no. So finally, I kind of exert my will upon him and say, "Look, Sam, I'm not asking you anymore. I'm telling you, we're going fishing."
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of force him into this position where he has to do this thing that he really doesn't want to do. So I get him out in the boat with me, and he's sitting there kind of with his arms crossed, kind of like the story of the little boy who got in trouble and his mom made him sit down in the corner, and his arms were crossed and he was real upset, and she said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "Well, I'm sitting down on the outside, but I'm standing up on the inside." So how rewarding would that be for me as a father to enjoy this fishing experience when I know in my heart that my son doesn't really want to be here with me doing this thing, you see? And so I think it's profoundly difficult for the husband, or I'm sure for the wife as far as that goes, for a spouse who's interested in sex and intimacy, but they detect that their spouse is not interested. They really don't want to be doing this, but they're doing it with like this sense of reluctance. I mean, that's very hurtful. It's very disappointing. It's very upsetting. And then if you go ahead and partake, then you feel like a jerk because you know that they don't want to be doing it. So it just leads to all this confusion and disruption and disorientation and misunderstanding and confusion and upset. So I think that's something that a lot of couples experience.
Well, I think it unfortunately kind of makes this cycle. So you have a high drive spouse who wants to have sex, and then you have the low drive spouse for whatever reason, whether they're not very good at initiating, so they're getting propositioned when they just can't do it because they're exhausted, or maybe they haven't had the time to make the mental switch, or whatever the reason that they're hesitant about it. And so they get approached by the spouse and they decline it. And then it just kind of builds this cycle and brings this tension between them, so that when they do choose to have sex, because, the one has given in, so to speak, because they can see that they're hurting their spouse by saying no, then the spouse comes in and they feel bad the whole time they're having sex with them, and they aren't there to meet the low drive spouse's needs. So that sends a signal to the low drive spouse that the high drive spouse is just there to meet their own needs.
Right.
And so it just, unfortunately, builds this cycle where the low drive spouse thinks the high drive spouse only wants them for their body. The high drive spouse is just trying to get in and get out as quickly as possible without bothering them too much. And so there's no real breaking of the cycle.
Right. So it creates this cycle that's difficult and hurtful and confusing and disorienting and upsetting to everybody. And then you try to talk about it, and it's hard to talk about, and it's very difficult. And I'm telling you, what we're talking about right now defined my marriage, the early years of my marriage. I mentioned earlier just a little bit of our testimony, but my wife and I were two very deeply broken people, and we were just a mess together, and we could not function, we couldn't relate, we didn't know how to connect, we didn't know how to talk about it. It was profoundly difficult. So thank God for His grace and His mercy. Hey guys, with that, I've got to jump in and interrupt our episode today because we're out of time, but please come back and be with us next episode as we continue this awesome discussion with Keelie Reason with the website Love, Hope, Adventure, and she's going to continue to share with us some important tips and strategies and ideas and suggestions that will help us be healthier sexually in the context of our marriages. God bless you guys. Have an awesome day, and I'll look forward to seeing you in our next episode.
Thanks for listening. Visit powerofpurity.org for more resources and information. And if this podcast has been helpful or encouraging, please invite a friend to listen. Until next time, remember, there's power in purity.